You know, people often ask me what it's like to be invisible to your family, or what it's like to hold a fortune in your hands that they don't even know about. Why didn't I help my brother when he was falling? Why did I work in a bookstore when I could have flown a private jet? And what did I do when it all came out? This is not a story about revenge. This is a story about choice. You will learn how loneliness can become strength, how silence can turn into a voice, and how a person who was not noticed can change everything. But before we begin, subscribe to the channel, like it, and write in the comments whether you believe in a second chance. Here we tell true stories about ordinary people with difficult destinies, and each of them may be closer than you think. Sometimes I think that I don't have real childhood memories. There are only frames, excerpts, eternal winter inside the house where silence hangs in the corners like moldy curtains, where words did not heal but wounded, and smiles were routine like signs on someone else's store window. My name was Elia. Go quieter. Elia, don't bother me. Elia, not now. But my brother's name was Cullen. Just Cullen. Or our talent. Or our hope. They forgave him everything. They bet everything on him. He was their pride. And I was the background. A silent shadow with a book in her hands and ears that had learned to hear everything, even when they weren't talking to you. Our house in the suburbs of Savannah was light, cozy, for an outsider's eye, with floor-to-ceiling windows and palm trees by the pool. But it was so cold in there, as if the walls were built of ice, not brick. Mom always smelled of expensive varnish and spoke with precision, as if her speech had been written in advance. Dad, an economist with a perfect shirt, spent his time at his laptop and was nearby, but always out of reach. Only Grandma Louise, Mom's mother, disturbed this crystal order. She came rarely, with a lavender scarf and warmth in her voice. She said strange things like, "Forgiveness is a quiet revolution, and be stronger than circumstances require." I didn't understand what it was about then. Now I understand. I remember one evening, I was maybe 10. I drew Mom, in watercolors, carefully, with her gray-green eyes and the wrinkle near her lips. I brought the drawing and handed it to her, timidly, like an offering. She looked at me, without looking up from her phone. "Is that me?" "Honey, I'm not that old, but thank you." And that's it. Not "well done," or "how beautiful." Just an indifferent tone, and a phone that was closer to her than me. At the same time, Cullen was rolling around the house in a carnival costume and telling how he would be an actor, or an IT specialist, or maybe an inventor. Mom laughed and filmed him. I remember standing in the doorway, squeezing the sheet of paper with the drawing so hard that I tore it. Sometimes it seems to me that at that very second something inside me broke, something soft that should have bloomed, but froze. I always tried, at school, in everyday life, in conversations. But the more I tried, the more I disappeared. Cullen got everything, clubs, trips, tutors, and I got old textbooks, buses, and phrases like, "You can handle it yourself, right?" When I enrolled in a course at the local college for additional literature at 16, my mother said, "Just don't be dramatic. You're not a genius like your brother. You know, I didn't even cry then. Tears were too luxurious for that life. I just started saving up silence. First, inside, then in actions." By 18, I had a job, a bank account, a scholarship, and a loneliness that had learned to remain silent. When the letter from New York University arrived, I unfolded it right at the kitchen table. Mom put down her fork. "Well, not bad," she said. "Just don't ask for money. We have Cullen with the IT Academy." I didn't ask. I wasn't going to. I knew I was leaving forever. I went to New York by train. The carriage was damp. It smelled of other people's sandwiches and wet newspapers. I held a notebook in my hands and wrote, "This is not an escape. This is the beginning." There, in the stone, loud city, smelling of concrete and coffee, I felt for the first time that I could be someone. Even though I had to work in a cafe near Koreatown, donate blood for money, choose between the subway and dinner, I got used to it. But inside there was always a feeling of emptiness, as if one door remained closed forever, and behind it stood Mom, Dad, and Cullen, with their eyes closed and empty hands. I often thought about Grandma. We wrote letters to each other, real ones, on paper. She called me my echo star. She said that I was a different breed. I treasured her every word. And then the phone rang. "Elia, Grandma is gone." And at that moment I realized that I was alone, completely, without roots, without an anchor, until I found out that she had left me something after all. No, not just a thing, a discovery, the kind that turns your whole life upside down. But more about that later. They say death doesn't come silently. It always sounds. For me, it was a call, a regular one, without warning. "Elia Morgan, good afternoon. This is Harvey Laurent, your grandmother's lawyer, Louise Bennett. I need to meet with you, as soon as possible, if possible." He spoke calmly without pathos, but there was something sudden in his voice, too dense, as if there was a whole army of omissions behind the words. "Did something happen to your grandmother?" "Unfortunately, yes. Louise passed away 2 days ago in her sleep. We tried to call earlier. I was instructed to personally convey to you information regarding her last will." I stared at the receiver for a long time after the call ended. I just sat in silence, with a cup of cold coffee in my hands and a dull ringing in my chest. It was not pain. It was as if the last thread connecting me with real care suddenly snapped. I went to Harvey's office the next day, despite my shift at the store. I just told Colleen, our manager, that I was taking a day off. She nodded. She liked me. She knew I wasn't asking without a reason. The office was in Manhattan, in a light stone building where the halls smelled of leather and paper, and Mr. Laurent himself, elderly, neat, with the slender fingers of a pianist and the eyes of a man who knows too much, greeted me as if he had known me since childhood. "You look a lot like Louise," he said, before we entered the conference room. The same directness in her gaze. There was already a folder on the table, brown, thick, with a wax seal, everything, like in the movies, only this wasn't a movie. "Your grandmother left clear instructions. Her entire fortune, in its entirety, without division, is transferred to you." "Everything?" I repeated like an echo. "Everything. A house, 4 properties in Georgia and the Carolinas, shares in several companies, savings in a Swiss account, and a stake in an investment holding company. The total value is about $18.5 million. I felt like I was falling into a pillow. No, into space, into something silent and unreal. But she has a daughter, my mother. The will says, I leave everything to Elia Morgan, because only she knows the value of loneliness and will not confuse love with greed. I was silent. It was like an ice flower had opened in my throat. I couldn't squeeze out a word, no joy, no anger, only emptiness. Harvey carefully slid the sheet of paper with her letter towards me. Real, handwritten, yellowed paper. Strict but warm handwriting. Elia, if you're reading this, it means I've already left. I know you feel lonely. And I know how hard you tried to be heard. Don't use that money to take revenge. It's not a weapon. It's a start. Do with this world what you thought was impossible. Love, but don't forgive weakly. Forgive when you're stronger. With love, your grandmother. Forever. I cried in that conference room for the first time in years, not because of the money, because someone, just one person, believed in me enough to leave me a future. When I got home, I didn't turn on the light. I just lay down on the floor, wooden, cold, dusty. I felt everything shift, like I was standing on the edge, and it was up to me whether I would jump up or down. I spent the night counting, not the money, but the decisions. If I told my family, they would come over, smile unnaturally, ask, "How did you deserve this?" Or worse, it should have been Cullen. If I just disappeared, that would be an escape. If I gave up everything, money would be a curse. But what if I lived the way I lived, but changed everything from the inside? Without noise, without fanfare. That was my choice. From that day on, I was two. On the outside, Aaliyah, a bookseller in Brooklyn, renting a one-bedroom apartment, drinking coffee from a paper cup, reading Jane Eyre on the subway. And inside, a woman who owned a chain of coffee shops in Texas, a stock portfolio, a law firm in Des Moines, and a trust fund with charitable funding in New Orleans. I took a course in venture capital. I read reports, talked to analysts, studied, fell, got up again. I didn't buy myself a new car. I didn't change my image. I didn't even change my home. My world grew underground, like the roots of a tree, and the top still looked modest. My family didn't know anything, but I watched, through reports, through the news, through social networks. I saw Cullen launch a new project, a mobile app for delivering inspiration, or something equally ridiculous. I saw my mother post a photo in front of a rented country house, captioning it, "Our corner by the lake," although this corner was taken through an agency whose accounts I had already bought. I knew that their debts were growing. I knew who they took money from. Because I owned these companies, I felt no anger, only a crisp, transparent caution. Revenge? No, it wasn't revenge. It was architecture. I built everything carefully, without unnecessary emotions. I wanted to know what would happen if life showed them a mirror. Not me, but life itself. When Callan called 2 years later, his voice was quiet, broken. Not the same as the one he used to use in school when he was planning to take over the world. He didn't know that I knew, that I held more in my hands than he could ever imagine. And I answered calmly, as if we had always been close. He said, "I have problems, Lee, really serious. I need help, money." I looked at the phone, and in my head, my grandmother's voice was playing, "Goodbye when you're stronger." And I knew. I was almost ready. Almost. I answered Callan as if there had never been a distance between us. "How much do you need?" I asked evenly, pouring myself a coffee, although my hands were shaking. I don't know. A lot. 50, 60,000 at least. For what? Well, I have an idea, a new one. This time, a real one. A time management app through AI personalized task flow. That's all for now. You just need to get started, you know? I understand, Cullen. Only I'm not you. And time. You don't control it. It controls you. But out loud I said, "I'll think about it. Not everything falls from the sky for me either, you know." He didn't even laugh. He just exhaled into the phone. "I know. It's just, I didn't know who else to go to." He didn't know. Of course not. He never knew that his invisible sister was now his invisible mistress. After the call, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, a cup in one hand, a phone in the other, a gap in my chest. Part of me wanted to close myself off from him forever. Part of me would have hugged him if I could. But I no longer lived in emotional extremes. I lived at a point of balance, and now I was going to use it to the maximum. It all started with buying debts. First there were my parents. The mortgage they thought they had almost paid off. Turns out they hadn't. I bought out the bank, through the trust, through the chain. Then there was my dad's credit card, which he had only paid off halfway. My mom's debts for beauty treatments, club dues, even the renovations to their lake house, which was actually rented through my company. Then there was Cullen. His inspiration project, as he called it, was already drowning in the red. He owed an investor $220,000. The investor, one of my people, smart but discreet, someone who would never tell who was behind the scenes. I wasn't tearing it down. I was building a ring, and now the ring was complete. They all, my parents, Cullen, owed me. They just didn't know it. Not yet. I was living in two gears those months. On one side, there was a bookstore where I stood at the checkout counter, recommending Fahrenheit 451 to teenagers and dusting the shelves. Colleen, the manager, called me our philosopher. On the other side, there were meetings on the 47th floor of a glass building overlooking the Hudson, a conference room, voice analytics, a decision to buy a microbiology startup that promised to revolutionize plastic recycling. I managed funds like a conductor manages an orchestra, and not a single musician knew who wrote the score. Sometimes I caught myself thinking strangely, who are you now, Elia? Where does the real you end and the mask begin? But then I remembered my mother's look, cold, off-putting. My father's words, dry, out of politeness. Cullen's words, with a slight superiority even in jokes. And I felt, I haven't reached the end yet. It's too early to show my cards. Then the second call came, this time from Dad. Elia, hi, we've been thinking. Mom, actually. We're a little stressed. Taxes, mortgage, club, everything's been piled up. Could you? Dad, I live above the bakery. Yeah, sorry. It's just, you've always been reserved. We appreciate that. And you have a job, a steady one. Not like Cullen, huh? I'll think about it, I said again. Okay? Another lie, but a necessary lie. They started coming, one by one, more discreetly, more carefully. Not right away, but step by step. Mom invited me to lunch, just to chat. It's been so long since we've all sat together as a family. As a family. It's amazing how you can say those words without remembering how this family refused to notice that I even existed. I came, not because I wanted to, because I needed to see through their eyes, their fear, their confusion, and their pretense. My mother met me in a dress that she used to wear to receptions. Only now it sat a little looser. Lost weight, nerves. Dad, in a sweater at home, without a tie. Even that was strange. Cullen, no longer confident in himself, with a phone in his hand and a trembling finger. He smiled, but there were no teeth in this smile, only submission. We ate in silence. They tried to strike up conversations about literature, about art. They even asked if I sometimes read investment blogs. I looked at them and said nothing, as if I was listening to an orchestra playing for the last time before a storm. Then my mother covered my hand with hers. Lee, we were not perfect parents. I raised an eyebrow. That's putting it mildly. We tried, really. We just didn't understand, and you were always withdrawn, independent. We thought you didn't need it. Help, support, love, just space. At that moment, I realized that they really didn't understand. They weren't pretending. They didn't understand how blind they were. And then I decided, I won't break. I'll set conditions. 3 weeks later, Cullen got a job offer. at a small logistics company in a warehouse in New Jersey. Simple, physical work, $16 an hour. He didn't know the company was part of my network. He didn't know that his foreman reported to someone who ultimately reported to me. My parents. They got an offer to move to a small, neat house in Carolina through the same company. There was also an offer of a position. My father was an accountant at an elementary school, my mother an administrator at a municipal center. I watched. I didn't interfere. If they refused, I would disappear. If they accepted, then there would be a conversation, and they accepted. At first, creaking. Then, as if with relief, they were tired, from lies, from status, from myself, and I saw it. Not right away, but I saw it. I still haven't told them the truth. They thought they were just lucky, that someone somewhere saved them, but by accident, or out of kindness. And I continued to work in the store, drink my coffee, watch. I was waiting for the moment, that one moment, when words won't seem like a threat, when revelation won't be revenge. But inside, the question was getting closer. What if I've already stopped being the Elia they once rejected? What if I'm not just stronger now, I'm above it? The answer is soon. Sometimes the loudest thing is silence. Not words, not confessions, not even screams. Namely, silence. Heavy, measured, like a pause before the last note. I didn't plan to reveal the truth that evening, but apparently, you can't plan the truth. It always appears, like the moon through the window when you forget to draw the curtains. It was dinner in Carolina, their new house, small, 2-story, white, with a peeling porch and a well-kept garden. The house didn't look rich, but for the first time, it looked alive. Mom cooked tomato soup and fresh flatbread. Dad set the cutlery. Cullen came in later, tired, in overalls, with calluses on his hands. They laughed. Yes, they laughed. Not forced, not out of politeness. Mom was telling how the local center had launched a pottery club and how, to her surprise, she turned out to be not clumsy. Dad joked about the school accounting department and kids who can even break Excel. Cullen talked about movers and the strange phrases they used to describe types of boxes. And I just listened. I sat in a chair with a mug of herbal tea and watched, as if I were watching a play where the main characters began to understand who they are, not thanks to the scriptwriter, but in spite of it. Something heavy was turning inside me, not pain, almost the opposite. Surprise. Can you really be like this? Real? Without roles? Without lies? Without masks? After dinner, we sat in the yard. The air was thick, humid. The cicadas sang their ancient songs, and Mom put a blanket on my shoulders. For the first time in my life. You were always differently, she said. Stronger than us. Deeper. We realized that too late. Dad nodded. And if it weren't for that incident with the move, we probably would never have slowed down. We wouldn't have seen how much we'd missed. Cullen was silent. Then he said, I work with kids who have nothing. And you know what's weird? They're kinder, more honest. They don't have the emptiness that I had. I always thought that everything had to come to me. And now I'm happy when I can just go to bed and know that I did something with my hands. I listened, and inside everything was shaking, as if someone was unclenching frozen fingers. Mom suddenly looked at me carefully. Lee, forgive me for asking, but this whole thing that happened to us, you had something to do with it, didn't you? Silence, like a shot into water. What do you mean? I asked. The house, Cullen's work, everything somehow happened. Too smoothly, too right. And you've changed, not outwardly. Inside, we feel it. You're no longer just the daughter we missed, Dad added. You're like a teacher. I looked at them, and I knew. This is it. The moment I had been dreading, putting off, not for them, for myself. I was afraid that when the truth came out, everything would break, that they would recoil, that they would get scared, or that they would say, "Oh, now I understand," and devalue everything. But in that second, I knew. They had already changed, not completely, not perfectly, but truly. And I didn't want to wear that mask anymore. I took an envelope out of my bag, white, with the seal of the law firm. I put it on the table. "Open it." Mom slowly tore the edge. Inside was a copy of the will and a letter from Grandma, the one I had read first. The silence became thicker than air. They read for a long time, word by word, then again and again. No one said a word, not even Cullen. I stood up, walked out onto the veranda, and stood under the stars. Let them decide. Let them feel. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Not because I was strong, but because I was free. A few minutes later, Mom came over. No tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. I was there, always. Only you weren't looking. And all this time I was waiting, not for you to repent, but for you to become real." Cullen followed. His eyes were wet, but not broken. "You bought my debts? All. You paid for my work? I gave you a chance, and you built everything else yourself." He sat down next to me. "You didn't take revenge?" "No." "Why?" I looked at him, smiled. "Because I would have been the same as you once were, and I didn't want to be cold. I wanted to be taller." Dad stood in the doorway. "We don't deserve this," he said. "Maybe not, but it doesn't matter." I stood up. "You were deaf. I was invisible. And now you hear, and I am visible. And that's enough for us." The three of us stood in silence, and for the first time, in a real family. Not in a shop window, not in a showy one, but in one where there are scars, but no lies. I didn't stay the night that evening. I went to a hotel in a neighboring town, alone, with a feeling I hadn't known before. It wasn't called victory. It was called peace. It didn't end with a bang or a flash, not with a pompous speech, not with applause, not with another bank transfer, but with silence. Not the kind that scares, but the kind that remains when you can finally breathe. 6 months have passed since that dinner in Carolina. The world didn't turn upside down. No one threw themselves into my lap. And yet, everything changed. Mom started teaching at a small craft center. Dad consults with aspiring entrepreneurs, helping them not to repeat their mistakes. And Cullen? He works in delivery and studies in the evenings. For the first time, he's really studying. I saw his list of courses: financial literacy for everyone, microeconomics for those who've always hurried, and how to ask for forgiveness. He didn't know that I'd seen this list, and that was especially valuable. As for me, I continued to live on 6th Street, in the same modest apartment above the bookstore. Every morning I drank coffee with Old House, who had long since stopped asking who I was, but always left me fresh cookies. My business suit hung in the closet, but I rarely wore it. My real capital is no longer in numbers. It is in the freedom to choose who you are and who you don't want to be. In March, I closed one of my most profitable assets, a chain of cafes bought through third parties. They told me, "You're losing millions." And I simply replied, "I'm giving others a chance. Let the managers buy the chain at cost. Let them build it themselves. I don't want to be an invisible ghost behind other people's stories anymore." And then I left. I didn't run away. I just went beyond the entire map that I'd been building for so many years. First, to Montana, to breathe, to listen to the silence of the forest, where the trees don't argue about who's taller. Then, to the northern coastal cities, where people aren't in a hurry, where no one knows my name, where I'm just a girl in a coat with a notebook. I wrote a story, myself, not for publication, just to stay. One day I got a call. It was my mother. "We want to sell the house," she said. "Why?" "Because now we have the strength to build our own. Not Grandma's, not the one that was bought out. Our own, small, but honest. Can you handle it?" "Yes, thanks to you." "Not thanks to, but in spite of," I corrected. We both laughed. "And you?" she asked. "Where are you now?" I thought. I was sitting on the veranda of a small hotel on the coast. My fingers smelled of ink. My hair was tangled in the wind. "I'm home. Wherever I am," I answered, "because I'm finally inside myself and not in their eyes. Sometimes I have dreams. I'm little, standing by the window. It's snowing outside, but inside the house it's warm. But I'm still freezing. In my dreams I turn around, and I see Grandma is holding a blanket in her hands, not made of fabric, of faith, of tenderness. I take cover, and I'm not cold anymore. I'm not a hero, and I'm not a saint. I was angry. I wanted to punish. I was silent for too long, and I didn't always act out of love, sometimes out of fatigue. But one day, when you reach the edge, the point where everything in you wants to scream, you suddenly choose silence, not as capitulation, but as strength. Because real strength is not in money, not in words, not in winning, but in giving a chance and not controlling whether they will accept it. I no longer wait for their gratitude. I don't peer into the phone screen, hoping for a call. I just live. And when I walk down the street, sometimes I smile at passers-by. Maybe there's another me among them, the one who is still freezing in a house with warm walls. I want her to know you can choose to be yourself, not loudly, but truly. This is my story, not loudly, not heroic, just real. Life is not always fair. Sometimes it hurts a lot. Those who should love turn away, and those who believe in you can leave too soon. But you know what I realized? It doesn't matter how much you have in your account. It doesn't matter how much pain you have behind you. What matters is who you choose to be, even when there is a reason to take revenge, even when no one sees. The main thing is to remain human. If you watch this video and feel that you have been underestimated, that you are in the shadows, it means that you have not yet reached your turning point. It will be, I promise. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories like this. Here we talk about ordinary people who have experienced betrayal, pain, loneliness, but did not break. Put a like if this story resonated with you, and be sure to write in the comments, what would you do in my place? Thank you for being with me. See you in the next story.